I'm Hector Rivero, President of the Texas Chemical Council. Delighted to be with you and very delighted to have Senator Larry Taylor and Representative Ed Thompson joining us here. I know their bios are in the little paper that you got out front, and so you can read all about them. But I do want to say that Harris, Brazoria County, and Galveston County are very fortunate to have representation by these two gentlemen. I know Senator Carol Alvarado is also listed to be on our panel. If she arrives, we're going to get her up here. But the three of them do an incredible job for the counties and the cities that they represent, and they are true champions for all of the industries that are vital to our Texas economy. So what I wanted to start off with is, you know, it's been a few months since the legislative session ended, but the Texas legislature had one of their most successful sessions in many, many years and had some very important accomplishments. So I know a lot of you have heard a lot of those, but I do want to allow both of these gentlemen to touch on some of the things, the highlights that they think are worth noting, and then we'll actually start shifting into, you know, what we foresee that they're going to be looking at for the next legislative session. So Senator Taylor, let's start off with you and talk a little bit about some of the things. I know you were very, very much involved in education and school finance reform. Tell us some of the things that you feel were most important that the Texas legislature addressed this past session.
Well, many people describe this as an education session, and it really was. We had to make some changes in our educational attainment, frankly, for our students. A lot of people don't realize, but our demographics have changed in the state. We're about 60% of our students now qualify for free and reduced lunch. That's our largest demographic. It's also our fastest growing demographic, and historically that's been our least educated demographic. So obviously it doesn't take long to see the trend lines on that. If you continue on that path, if you don't change that dynamic where these kids don't get a better education, we will not be the Texas that we are today in the very near future. So this session was really about changing that and making sure we get a better attainment for all of our students all across this great state. And we put money into it, and we put transformational ideas into it, you know, things that actually they're proven to work, and implementing programs that we've seen work at a local level across the state that have really made dramatic improvement in the attainment for our low-income students. And so we put some significant dollars, about $6.5 billion into public education, as an additional $5 billion into reducing the property taxes for schools that you're paying, and making sure the state maintains its share. But we really went into the most important thing about education is teachers. You need to have good quality teachers in a classroom. And we made several steps toward making sure, one, we increase pay, and we also recognize we have grant programs for school districts who choose to take this on to develop programs where they recognize their best teachers, pay them more money, and then pay them even more money if they go to the more challenging campuses that they have. We've seen that work in Dallas ISD with dramatic results, and so we're trying to get that going. We did the teacher pay raise. We also worked on early childhood education, put a lot of money in to make sure that every one of these low-income kids, good morning, Senator, making sure that every one of those low-income kids has the opportunity to go to full-day pre-K to help them get caught up and be ready by the time, you know, first grade starts. Just real quick, to give you an idea where we are in our state, third grade reading. This is the importance of early childhood education. Third grade reading, our percentage of kids who are reading at third grade level at the end of third grade is in like 40%. So up to third grade, you're learning to read. And from third grade on, you're reading to learn. So if you have 40% of your students, and for some of the demographics we have is even lower than that, your opportunity for educational attainment from that point forth is really challenged. In fact, it's one of the best indicators for how well you can do in academics after that. So we've got to get that number up significantly to make sure these kids have the opportunity. So we did early childhood education. We actually extended the school year. School's going to extend another 30 days for low-income kids who've not been able to catch up during that year. They have an additional half day for 30 days. They can continue coming back in, shorten that little summer break, but give them an opportunity to get caught up. I just heard the commissioner speak at the Greater Houston Partnership. That's like the first time we've talked about adjusting the school calendar since like the 1800s. What we did with school finance is something that's not done but about every 30, 40 years. And some things we've done were actually unprecedented. One of those is that we did it without a Supreme Court decision saying we had to get it done. But this legislature stepped up in a huge way to make sure we continue to ensure the future of Texas with education. The second thing we had to deal with was school safety. You know, with the school shootings and the other things going on, that was one of the big issues that we had to handle this session. And we put forth great resources to try to get at the need of not just changing the infrastructure of these buildings, but also to prepare our students and our teachers to look out for and be prepared for mental health issues. The best thing you can do about school violence is prevent it. It's not how you handle it once it starts, is you got to prevent it in the first place. And that all starts with knowing who your students are, where they are, and having resources available to help those kids who are kind of getting off the path a little bit, help them get back on the path. So that was the other thing. For me, the coastal barrier, and for a lot of us in this area, that was a big deal. We had an opportunity. The feds have given us money for what I call the bookends of the coastal barrier. That would be the Beaumont area and the Freeport area. They gave us money. We had to come up with a local match, or that whole project went down the tubes. You know, there's a list of Army Corps of Engineers projects that's miles long, and if you finally bubble up to the top, if you miss your opportunity, you're gone. So we were able to get the money secured to do that, so the coastal barrier is going to continue on the process of completing that. It's a big project. It's going to take a while to get done, but we had to keep that thing going. We were able to get that done. And the last thing I worked on was the windstorm. Make sure our coastal windstorm insurance rates were reasonable, not increased exorbitantly, which they've been doing for a number of years. We were able to stop that with some restructuring that. So it was a very busy session. I got to tell you, for me personally, it was very stressful, but it was very successful at the end of the day, and it was very worthwhile to be there, and I appreciate it.
Well, and I do want to emphasize the fact that I cannot remember in over 25 years of working in and around the Capitol, I can't remember when the legislatures come together and been able, through a bipartisan fashion, to pass a school finance bill without the Supreme Court holding a gun to your head, telling you had to do it. And so it's a major accomplishment and shows the great leadership and teamwork that you have in the legislature. So I want to welcome Senator Carol Alvarado to the stage. Thank you. I know we started a few minutes early, Senator, so our apologies. Ed, let me come back to you. You serve as Vice Chair of the House Environmental Reg Committee and also on the Transportation Committee. I do want to point out that Representative Thompson carried a very important bill for industry. The petrochemical industry is committed to eliminating plastic waste by the year 2040. And the only way we can do that is by really addressing recycling challenges that exist. And Ed passed legislation this past session that is going to take us make a very great stride forward to be able to accomplish that. You want to tell us a little bit about that and some of the other issues that you worked on?
Sure, thank you. Well, I will say this, you know, that I really appreciate the partnership that we had on that particular piece of legislation. It's always important to us as legislators. You know, we have to have, passing a bill in the legislature is not as easy as some might think it is. So it's very important that we have partners that come alongside us to help us move that legislation, to be able to educate. We're many times in the House, our staffs are pretty small, so we don't have the time to be able to spend in a short period of time like a legislative session to be able to get all the messages out that we need to get out to get a piece of legislation passed. So the Kim Council did a great job of helping us with that to promote that House Bill 1953, which was the bill. What it did is it took the plastics basically the plastics that aren't your normal recyclables, your ones and twos, it took the other plastics and actually took them away from being a waste to actually making them a feedstock so that they could actually be used through this pyrolysis and gasification, they could be converted into fuel. It's a cutting edge industry. It's something that we're really excited about here in the state of Texas to bring it. I had a difficult time trying to get some of my peers to understand the importance of this. Some of them felt like that it wasn't, you know, the industry wasn't quite there yet, but you know, my thought is that we've got to start somewhere, and this was a piece of legislation that I felt like was the beginning of this, and I have full confidence in the industry that we're going to be able to get there. One of the reasons I felt it was so important is because, as most of you in this room know, what the plastics industry has in our area, or the impact that it has in the petrochemical industry, and what we're seeing with that. And I know the other day I read an article where Desante water, they're going to start putting their water in aluminum, and a lot of it is because of the pushback by people over plastics, and that's frightening to me. I mean, it's frightening to me that we might be in a situation where they're the end users of this product, and then that has an impact on all of us. So I think it's incumbent upon us to take the initiative to be able to provide for a way to recycle this material, to get it out of the waste stream, and to reuse it. I think it's very, very important. I do believe that was a huge, although it wasn't anything like school finance, it was still a big step in this particular region and what we see here. We also worked very hard on TERP, which is the emissions reductions plan here in Texas. It's one that has been in effect for a long time, but it's in my opinion, we just haven't used it the way we need to. We had a piece of legislation that we actually expanded some of the ability for people to be able to get those grants and to use equipment that's not necessarily in a non-attainment area for the length of time that it needed to be. It gives TCEQ a little more flexibility. Also, there was a bill that was passed that sets the TERP funds up outside of appropriations, which I think was a huge step in getting more and more money into these grants. Plus, the other thing that we did is we also appropriated the funds for additional FTEs at TCEQ to be able to administer those grants, because you can apply for a grant, but if you don't have someone there to work that grant through the process, it doesn't really do much good if we don't have people that are working. In fact, the author of this bill and I, we had quite a spirited discussion during the Environmental Regs Committee meeting about that, and he was adamant that he didn't want to add those FTEs, and fortunately, when it got over to the Senate said, we need to add additional FTEs, so I got a chance to kind of rub his nose in that a little bit, so that was kind of a neat deal too. So, but that was another big, huge, lift that we got there as well. One of the things I think that we're hearing a lot about, and in the interim, I've been out and about and talking to people and visiting with them about issues and that sort of thing. And one of the things that we're getting the most feedback on when people find out I'm on the Environmental Regs Committee is their question is, well, what are you going to do about climate change? What are you going to do about the environment? What are you going to do about the climate? And I trying to explain to them the fact that, industry is really doing, it's not our non-stationary emissions that's the problem. It's it's those that are moving around. This non-stationary is the problem. The stationary is not. So we've got to do a better job of that, and I hope through the Transportation Committee, I believe that's one way that we can take a little bit of a bite out of that as we move forward in trying to provide for more roadways to where people can move faster. These cars sitting, idling, and that sort of thing is one of the big issues that we have. So I think transportation is a key to our climate change and some of the environmental issues that we're facing as we go forward. So, and I want to say something about on the education side of one of the bills that was passed in a previous legislative session that I think sometimes, we kind of forget about, but HB 5, which was passed 2 sessions ago, I believe it was, in my opinion, this legislation that we did on school finance was huge, and it's going to change education. But HB 5 was also, in my opinion, one of the biggest pieces of legislation that we passed. And what we're seeing today is we're seeing more and more students be able to be involved in a lot of these, technical be able to receive certifications that they were not able to get before. You know, we were more on the college path, and now we've taken a look at this and said, you know, there are good jobs out here. There is a need to have these students that maybe aren't going to a four-year college track, but to be able to get those associate degrees and to be able to get those certifications, to be able to work in industry. And I was very, very excited to be a part of that. I think that was, in my opinion, one of the biggest pieces of legislation that this legislature had passed in many years. So
thank you. And you mentioned air quality, and you know, all of us in this room, in this region, know that there were some recent events in the last several months that took place, some industrial accidents that really were alarming to industry, but also alarming to our communities. And I know that Senator Alvarado, you stepped up right away and wanted to address the availability of air quality monitoring and address the needs that are there. You really helped champion towards the end of session after some of the events. You came to us and others and said, we need to do more, we need to have better technology, we need to have better funding. What are some of the things that you're proud about from the session that are really going to provide better transparency and better data for the people of Harris, Galveston, and Prince George County?
Sure. Good morning, and thank you. It's good to be with my colleagues again. Well, after the ITC fire, and actually there were a couple of fires that occurred during the session, and I'm very grateful that the Lieutenant Governor put together a committee. Well, it started out as a select committee on ports, but we also incorporated some of the recent fires that had taken place during the session. And we know that there are things that could have been prevented with this particular company, who had a very shady track record, if you will, with past violations. But we worked this session in a very bipartisan way to get more funding. We got a little over $1 million, and that was for a new mobile unit van, and then retrofitting and updating 2 more vans. And this was to get real-time sampling. This is something that the community asked for, and we were able to secure the funding. And then that also included 15 handheld mobile monitors, air monitors. Again, getting sampling, getting the testing done in real time, and allowing for more transparency and getting information out to the community in a more timely manner. And Hector, I do want to thank you because we worked hand in hand with TCEQ to get more funding. And Ed was talking about TURP. One of the other things with TURP was we gave TCEQ's authorization to utilize $2.5 million per biennium to research emission sources in non-attainment areas. So that's going to be a big help moving down the line in what we can all do together in making sure that we have clean air to breathe.
Thank you, and Senator, let me stay with you. You also were very actively involved with a lot of issues of importance to the port. And so you want to talk a little bit about some of that legislation that you helped champion?
As y'all know, we had a big issue that was going on in the Port of Houston with the argument over the one-way traffic, two-way traffic, and there were a couple of pieces of legislation that were that came out of that. And well, one of the reasons why the Lieutenant Governor established the Select Committee on Ports was for this specific reason. But one of the bills that I passed was separating the governance from the Board of Pilots and the Port Commission, because it was the same governing body governing both entities. And some of that, as we look back at the research on how this issue came about with just the one-way traffic, there was some areas that could have been addressed more appropriately. And I feel that had there been a separation of governance, we wouldn't have gotten into a situation where we had miscommunication with our energy companies up and down the channel who were not aware of the one-way traffic policy coming, which was a detriment to them getting their supply, getting their product out into the global market. And we saw that that had pretty severe impacts to their business, and if it impacts their business, it's going to impact us regionally and in our in our state. So separating those two, we think that alleviates any potential conflict of interest. And Brandon Creighton, the chair of the committee, passed a bill for a 2-year moratorium on the one-way traffic. But what has come out of this is a partnership where the coalition that was opposing the straight-on one-way traffic, they are now utilizing their political clout, their resources, along with the Port of Houston to ultimately have the port widen, the channel widen and deepening. And that's going to cost us, but the coalition is committed to putting in about $500 million, I believe it is, to contribute to get the process going. They've been up to Washington, D.C. together. They've met with several representatives in the administration and also with Secretary of Energy Perry. And from what I understand, this project for the widening and deepening is a priority, and the fact that we're coming in with money, that will help move it along.
So as we all traveled through the high waters this morning, we're reminded of just a couple of years ago, Hurricane Harvey, and the incredible impact it had to this community and the entire Texas Gulf Coast. The legislature also tackled that issue. Wanted to ask each of you if y'all like to comment on some of the things that y'all worked on to address relief, response, preparedness for future storms or associated with Hurricane Harvey.
Well, it started with a supplemental budget. You know, we meet every other year, and we have to do a budget that's 2 years. It's actually more than 2 years when we're actually in session, because it starts September the 1st, and we end in May. So what we do with that supplemental budget, things that happen that we need to pay bills for, we do at the very beginning of the session. And Senate Bill 500 was this year's supplemental budget, and we put significant dollars, like $3.5 billion, towards catching up on some of the Harvey expenses. Education, you know, a lot of our schools were impacted, so we had to help them through that. But we went beyond just fixing what had happened. We also went into planning and make sure we do everything we can to prevent this from happening in the future. So we had a couple bills, significant impact, a statewide flood plan. You know, right now we kind of have regional, everybody has their own little thing going on. This is a statewide plan, because these basins go between counties, between cities and all that. We all need to be on the same page working together to try to prevent these things. We have some of those things. Had a couple bills having to do with planning and make sure we're getting more prepared for the future. Some areas around Houston, particularly, they're talking about another reservoir, those types of things to work on. And so I think we did the wise and prudent thing. First of all, we fixed what you had to fix, but then we also looked out there and tried to do what we can to prevent it from happening in the future, which I think is very important, and particularly in this area.
Ed or Carol, you have anything to add to that?
Well, we did take, I believe it was $1.7 billion out of the rainy day fund in order to, you know, fund a lot of these issues that occurred during Hurricane Harvey. So there were, you know, funds that were available to address these issues. Also, a debris management plan was also set up to where, because what happens in a lot of cases, and many of the people in this room that are with cities and counties, you know, they contract with these folks to remove debris, and then things happen. So this was actually something that we recognized as being an issue. In fact, a lot of the after Hurricane Harvey, we took Chancellor Sharp was a part of that you know, Harvey czar, I guess is what they called him. But they did a really great job of lining out a lot of the issues that there were stumbling blocks, if you will, for not only for governments but also for people as they move through these catastrophes. And we passed a tremendous number of bills that addressed that. You know, just what might seem like minor things. I had one that I carried. It seems like a minor thing, but TxDOT, it didn't have the ability to be able to buy any food or water for their employees. And these people were working 24 hours a day. I mean, they were there the whole time. So we passed a piece of legislation now that allows TxDOT to be able to provide for that for their employees. So just little things like that sometimes you don't really think about until you get into one of these catastrophes, and then you start finding out what you can and what you can't do. And naturally, you know, a lot of times government is a whole lot different than private industry. You know, they can only do what they're allowed to do by law. So in a lot of cases, these were things that we addressed that I think really will make a huge difference as we move into, hopefully, we won't face another catastrophe like that, but if we do, there'll be some legislation there that'll help with that.
And we, as Larry said, we did pass a bill to set the framework for a statewide plan. This is going to be administered through the Texas Water Development Board, and they've been holding meetings across the state to get input from local stakeholders and from the community at large on what should be in the statewide flood plan. And then SB 7 was passed, which Ed alluded to, taking the $1.7 billion out of the Rainy Day Fund. The Rainy Day Fund finally lived up to its name. And that you're going to see on the part of that you'll see on the November ballot with Proposition 8, which sets up the Resiliency Fund, the Infrastructure Fund, to disperse these funds. We're not sure how that's going to be released, if it's going to be in the form of low interest rate loans or grants. It could be kind of a hybrid or something like the SWIFT program that we passed a couple of sessions ago. But that's important. That will be Proposition 8 on your ballot, and that's going to help to fund a lot of the projects in and around our regional area here in this part of our state. I passed a bill, SB 799, which establishes a Natural Disaster Business Advisory Council. This will be members appointed by the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House to address issues and concerns with the business community, small businesses, medium size and large size, on preparing for disasters and then recovering post-disaster.
Excellent. Well, you know, one of the important issues for the Economic Alliance is maintaining and attracting new jobs. And I know the three of you had heard me, and many of you all have heard me talk about that since 2010, we've had the benefit of having over 90 projects announced in Texas in our industry, worth over $70 billion of new investment, which is creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. Many of those projects, not all, but many, would not be possible if it weren't for economic incentives. And groups like the Economic Alliance are really instrumental in helping us secure those. Quite frankly, it is the competition for these dollars is so great. This past session, y'all took an important step by extending Chapter 312 of the tax code. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe what's in front of us with Chapter 313, which is going to expire in 2022?
Well, I'll just say, you know, having been involved with economic development for a long time, when I was on city council before I became a state representative, you have to have some type of incentives out there, because when companies are looking to relocate or expand, they have a checklist. And if you don't have any incentives, you don't even make the first round of the checklist, and then you're out of consideration. So we have to have those things, and I think it's been used in a very big way for Texas, because we don't have an income tax, we have property taxes, so you have to give some kind of a way to help alleviate that cost as companies are coming in or choosing to expand. So it's very important. The 313 is a little bit more complicated, because the 312 is all about local cities and counties. The 313 has to do with school districts, which is also the state is involved with that deal, unlike on the local, state, and county. And there have been some abuses of the 313 where they were kind of using it to go around this, the Texas school finance system. So we will be looking at that. That was not extended. That's going to be up in 2021, I believe. So we'll be back in session before that expires, or 2023.
It expires in 2022.
Yeah. So we have next session to look at that. But there will be some very careful consideration, understanding the importance of it, because your school tax is about half your tax bill in a lot of places. So it's a very important part of it. But we do have to make sure we don't have it as a way to go around the school finance system.
Sure. So we're getting some tweets in, and Ed, you're on the Transportation Committee. One of the questions that we're getting is that toll roads are vital to this region's ability to move people for good efficiency. What do you see on the horizon for toll roads and for transportation projects?
Well, recently, the Grand Parkway, which kind of CR 99, it was actually taken out of the UTP. And that was a huge concern for our area because Segment B, which runs through our area, and then there was B, C, and D were the three sections that were removed from that UTP. That goes all the way from, basically from the West Park Toll Road all the way around to I-45. I was very concerned about the fact that it was going to be removed from the UTP, as were many others. So we, along with Senator Taylor and others that worked on that, you know, to try and get that back into the UTP. There was a lot of government industry people that weighed into that as well, and we made numerous trips up to the to TxDOT commission meetings and sat down with commissioners, and fortunately that was put back in the UTP, which is basically the 10-year plan for that unified transportation plan. So I was excited about the fact that they did hear what we were saying. One of the commissioners made the statement to me. He said, you know, well, you know, we are in a non-toll environment. And I said, well, who said we were in a non-toll environment? I mean, I know there are people that don't like toll roads, but my argument to that was, you know, and I'll use this argument, you know, I ask people all the time, I said, you know, do you have cable TV? And they'll say, well, yeah, I have cable TV. And I said, so, but there is free TV, right? You can put an antenna up and you can watch TV without having to purchase cable. But you want, by choice, you want to have that cable for you know, the variety that you have, you know, what you can do with that you can't do with regular TV. Why is a toll road any different? I have a choice as to whether or not I want to get on a toll road. No one makes me do that. No one says you have to get on a toll road. So I just look at it from a standpoint of, I don't think we should take that out of TxDOT's ability to be able to work on projects. Certainly non-tolled roads are the ones of preference. You certainly prefer to have a road that's not tolled, but there are times and situations where that's just not feasible. So I think it's important. I think it's something that we as a legislature need to have some say in, and whether or not we continue with this non-tolled environment. I think it should be up to the legislature to decide that.
Representative
I've
Alston.
never heard the analogy of toll roads to cable, but that's an interesting one.
good.
I'm sure the cable industry would appreciate that.
I don't receive any funds from the cable industry.
Well, we like to say that incentives and choice is good, mandates are bad.
Right.
So we
Exactly.
appreciate that. Another question came in is whether or not the legislature can reverse the trend of cities using HR law, home rule laws on regulations such as sick leave. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I come from city government. I was on the Houston City Council for 6 years, so, I probably differ with maybe whoever's asking that question, but I'm also a firm believer in local control, and I think that's important. We elect mayors, we elect city council members for a reason, and if you're unhappy with the way they're governing, then I think you take that up with them, and your actions should be decided at the ballot box.
Well, there's also a lot of interest.
I would just say, the state, actually, the cities were creations of the state. And so we do have laws regulate what cities could do. And the problem is, whether it's issues or like we had a few session or two ago, the fracking. If you have local entities starting to do this patchwork of legislation, or in their case, their local laws, change it. If you're a company that's working with all those different areas, it's very difficult to keep it consistent across your labor or however you do your laws. So there is a legitimate function for the state to step in some cases to say, no, this is how we're going to do it statewide in Texas. We have to have some consistency. We had some discussion this past session. I know Austin had a paid leave, and I honestly can't tell you what ended up happening with that bill. Maybe one of you guys can remember. I was a little busy at the very end working on the conference committee for the budget and for House Bill 3, the education bill. So I may have missed what happened. Carol, do you remember?
No, I think it passed, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, there's a lot of interest in this group also. Senator, you mentioned the continued efforts on the coastal barrier and the work going on in the Golden Triangle. A lot of folks here are interested, when are we going to get the funding and be able to complete the project for the Galveston, Chambers County section of the coastal barrier?
Well, I could tell you, as a project I've been working on since about 2008, this is a high priority for me, but it's a very difficult job. It's like pushing somebody with a rope. It's very difficult, but what it's going to take is consistent, constant pressure to keep this thing going. Like I said, we had an opportunity this past session to make sure we kept that thing alive. But the fact that the feds have funded the bookends shows that they have an interest in getting this done. And I mean, the facts are there. This is too important of a project, not just for our region or our state, but for the whole country, that we have to get this done. Now I hear some crazy things like, well, let's get it all ready, and then after the next storm, then we'll get it built. And I'm like, you can't get any stupider than that. I'm sorry. Really? We could have another 80, I mean, how many billions have we spent in the last few storms? 30 billion, 60 billion? This project may cost 8 to 10 for this area. Why would you wait till you have another 30, 40, 50, $80 billion event and then go back and do it? And that doesn't make a bit of sense. It's going to take a while to build it. I get that. But the quicker we get started on the construction, the better. So it's going to take constant pressure from this area, from our industry partners, to let folks know. And I know the industry has a lot of locations in other states. And we've also worked with other states, worked with the American, you've changed your name, it's not the American Chemistry Council. Working with them on their part. A lot of this feedstock goes to all those places. They understand if this is shut down, it shuts them down. So we need to get them to talk to their congressman as well to get this project going. It's going to take a while to build it. We got to get on it. We got to get started. As far as an exact timeline, I can't give you that. We're there every other year. In the meantime, we keep pushing. We have a committee, an interim committee that continues to meet, a joint committee of the House and the Senate, to make sure we keep our eyes on this and keep pushing during the interim. But very important project. This is one of those legacy things, like the seawall in Galveston that was built after the 1900 storm. It's still there today, over 100 years later, doing the job it was built to do, and that's what we need to do for this region.
In these last few minutes, I want to transition to what you see for the next legislature. Now, we've already got these laws in effect. You can start focusing interim studies and looking at what the work for the next legislature is going to be. I know that's kind of a little depressing, right, Larry? But one of the questions that came through is, as we talk about choice for toll roads, where does high-speed rail play into the mix? Is that something that y'all think the legislature will tackle in the next session?
Well, we've already been in the scrimmage, if you will, over high-speed rail. A lot of the folks along that corridor are certainly opposed to it. You know, there are no state funds that have been appropriated, nor do I believe there ever will be any state funds appropriated to it. This will be a private entity that takes it on and constructs it. And I believe they've already hired a construction company to begin, I guess, to begin the design and that sort of thing of it. So I personally believe that, you know, these sorts of transportation discussions need to be had. I mean, as this state continues to grow, you know, and I always use this as a perspective. When I was born, there were 7 million people in the state of Texas. Today, there's 28.5 million people in Texas. The projection in 2050 is to be 50 million people in Texas. So, I mean, we have got to start thinking along the lines of other ways to transport people. I mean, we can't continue to just lose focus on the fact that we're not going to have an issue going forward. So I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I don't know if, you know, high-speed rail is you know, the answer, but I think it is something that certainly is a answer to some of the issues that we have in transportation. But we'll continue to have that discussion as we move forward. There are a lot of people that certainly don't like the idea of that rail being done, but for Houston, it would be a tremendous economic benefit, I believe.
I think moving to next session, certainly redistricting will dominate most of the session. Some of us are on redistricting, and I know the House has started meeting. They have 2 meetings coming to the Houston area. I think they've set 28 or something meetings around the state. The Senate Committee on Redistricting will have its first meeting next month, and then we won't meet again until, I think, sometime in January. But that's important. That will most likely be probably one of the more partisan issues you'll see. We work so much and so hard on many bipartisan issues with education, with Larry's leadership, and Harvey-related items, but redistricting tends to bring out some partisanship. So, but I'm confident that we'll come up with something that we can all live with. I think the will is there, but this is something that sets the lines for the next decade, not just our own lines, the House and the Senate, but congressional lines as well. And we start with the census, so that's always an important component leading up to redistricting. And one thing I want to continue to do is to build on some of the workforce issues that I worked on this session, and getting the bill passed to create the Texas Apprenticeship Grant Program within the Workforce Commission, and that will allow people to utilize grants to train workers in an apprenticeship program to pay people while they learn a trade, while they learn a skill. And we worked very closely with industry on that, and hopefully that is one component that can solve some of the issue of the skills gap with many of our neighboring partners in this community.
Thank you, Senator. And before you got here, I tried to tell everybody how fortunate they were to have such capable people representing them in Austin. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you all.